There we go. So thanks very much, guys, for joining in the event this evening. You're all very welcome. We're just getting set up and letting people into the room. If you want to drop into the chat where you are this evening, it's always interesting to see where people are logging in from. I believe we have nearly one of our speakers from Madrid this evening, so we're going European-wide, far beyond the shores of Northern Ireland, UK, so delighted. At the moment, I'm based in Newton Abbey, and our company Raise would have our headquarters based in the Cathedral Quarter in Belfast, but we work with startups across Northern Ireland, Ireland, and into the UK. So we're excited to host the Tech for Non-Tech event this evening with 3 great speakers. And it's the whole concept, I guess, behind Tech for Non-Tech was always about learning and sharing knowledge within the tech sector, even if you're from the tech sector. So we work with startups that have traditionally either tech knowledge and looking for industry expertise, or industry experts looking for tech expertise, and we try and join the two, and that was the whole concept of these events. And then it started to expand further into just general learning about the tech sector. So David, we've done lots of different types of events, right from UX, community, through to recruitment, through to mental health. Any others that you can think of? Or we did the gaming one as well.
Gaming, no code, either UX development, teaching, lots of different stuff. You're covering all sort of the NI tech scene, pretty much.
Yep. So it's great to have tonight. So tonight we have Mulholland, James Donaghy, and Nearly I'm going to pronounce it wrong, McCangu, I guess.
Yes, right.
Later, and we also have Chris from NICE joining us this evening as well. And I was just saying, as we were getting set up, when we were talking about launching this workshop, Chris actually posted out into WhatsApp or into Twitter that they were looking for a product
on your shoulder in the wrong position.
Owner. So as part of that, we invited him along to have a chat about the recruitment process he's going through at the moment, because it's live and it's actually happening, and it's going to be good to talk about NICE itself. So I'll stop my share screen here, and I'll invite Chris to do a quick intro to his startup NICE and tell us a bit more about the recruitment he's going through at the moment.
Thanks very much, Jenny. I'm going to just share my screen here briefly. I'll keep this kind of short and sweet because I'm kind of gate crashing, but thanks very much, Jenny, for asking me to kind of talk about the role we're looking for. We're just give you a bit of background on the company. We're a local company. Basically, NICE is like a brand asset manager for creative teams. So we make it easy to create and share your logos, photos, and videos, and so on in a more collaborative, visual way. So it's kind of like a bit like Notion for brand teams. And we're based entirely in Northern Ireland, but we have customers all over the world. And we've got customers like PlayStation, Disney, and Instagram. And we're fully self-funded and plan to keep it that way. But we're currently doing all of that with 5 people, which is nuts. And so we're hoping to grow the team this year to hopefully about 8 by the end of the year. But yeah, as Jenny said, the first step we think is kind of getting a proper product manager in place. I've kind of been the de facto product manager, I guess, since the start, but I'm also having to run a company, and I'm sort of, I've got a product design background, but I wouldn't say that I'm that experienced when it comes to actual, the official product management side of things. So I'm kind of looking forward to hearing all the different opinions about how it should be done. And so yeah, we're hoping to find an experienced product manager to help us just level up our processes, and kind of feel like it's important to get that in place before we scale up the team anymore. So we're a fully remote team at the moment, though we're planning on, like, we have an office in the Cathedral Quarter as well. Although we've been working pretty well remotely over lockdown, we're planning to kind of continue that on. We're hoping to have regular meetups post lockdown as well, and sort of play Exploding Kittens every morning to sort of keep in touch with everyone. I'm currently losing, but that's fine. And so yeah, like I said, we're looking for an experienced product manager, someone who's sort of passionate about process, has strong opinions about agile, and hopefully someone that likes the idea of being part of a tight-knit bootstrap team, working with most creative brands in the world. If that sounds good to you, I'd love to hear from you. My DMs are open on Twitter @Armstrong, or you can email me, Chris@Nice. Thank you very, very much, Jenny, for that opportunity.
No, you're very welcome, Chris. I mean, I'm a marketeer by heart, and I'm going to ask the tricky question: why have you gone for a product manager and not gone for, traditionally we would hear our startups going straight for a sales or a marketing role at the stage that you're at?
We also have a marketing challenge, and we are starting to figure that out. I think we're currently going through a process of figuring out where we think we're best sort of targeting our marketing. You know, is it sales? Is it self-serve, that kind of thing. So we're still trying to define exactly what we need from a marketing person, but we definitely do need that role filled, because I'm no sales guy. But yeah, it definitely feels like at the moment we're hitting a lot of bottlenecks on the product side, mostly from me, being pulled too many different directions, and it's time to kind of give that a dedicated resource and really level that up to take it forward. Basically, we've got a heck of a lot of stuff to build, and we've got a very clear idea of where we need to get to, but figuring out how to actually get there as a bootstrap team without a team of 50 engineers behind us is the challenge. So it definitely, we could try and sell more of this thing, but if the product isn't keeping in step with that, then we're just going to have a lot of disappointed customers. So I figure it's important to have the foundation right in the business first, and then figure out how to sell more of it.
Yeah, no, very good. I think it's good getting the foundations right is key, and as you say, getting those conversations going within the product and the features, and building that forward before you go to market. But that's really good to see, and I'm glad that we spotted your tweets and that you're in the wheelhouse that we're talking about tonight. So thank you very much. Chris's details are in the chat there, and happy for anybody to get in touch, say hello, and even just have a conversation. And likewise, any founders on the call, in terms of looking for technical advice and help, any of the speakers, I'm sure this evening will lend a half an hour of a virtual coffee if anybody has any technical questions. I think that's the joy of the Tech for Non-Tech, that can lead to further kind of learning, not just on the screen tonight. So thanks very much, Chris. Appreciate it. Let me just see if we can move your screen share. So moving on, next up this evening we have Emma from Instill, and she's very much of the product mindset, working across startups, large enterprises in an agile lab, using lean techniques, an advocate for product management through different community groups, not just her day job, Product Tank, Lean Coffee and Product Camp. So well experienced in the product space. I'm delighted to have Emma here this evening. I'll pass over.
I will share my screen now, hopefully. She says, yay. Hopefully that is now presenting nicely. Yes, okay. Okay, cool. So my name is Emma Mulholland, obviously just been introduced. I've put myself down as a product person. I think we might have conversations throughout the evening about different terms like product manager or product owner, or but effectively I live and breathe everything product. It's also interesting, this whole tech for non-tech concept, because I don't come from a technical background. So my degree was in management, and I've done a load of different roles in technology my whole career. Effectively looking back, they probably were all product roles, but before they were called product manager roles, like business analyst or customer experience manager, business development manager, etc., etc. So even though I'm not technical, I'm kind of doing that product person role. I think we want to talk for about 15 minutes today. I have a load of content here, so I might kind of try and get through things quickly, or kind of cover some of the core concepts. I'm going to just cover product 101, like just a whistle-stop tour of what the high-level introduction to product management is. Basically, so I can set up the next two lovely speakers, James and Neely, to then give some really lovely examples of what they're doing specifically in the role. Okay, so let's talk about building products is risky and hard, so therefore you need product management. So what is a product management and what is a product manager? And we might get a little bit of time to move into like how do product managers manage products, a little tiny bit of high level theory. Don't want to do too much because I think the other two folks have like loads of examples they're going to talk about. But let's start with, well, what exactly is a product? It seems like a pretty obvious question, but it's nice to start with the basics and actually kind of specifically hone in on some of the key concepts that you then take throughout the whole of the product management discipline. So product creates specific value for a group of people, customers and the users, and to the organization that develops and provides it. So this is the definition from Moman Pitchler. He's kind of a guru in product management if you're just interested in it as an area of interest, and he's got good templates and a lot of things on his site if you want to go look at it. But I've called out some key terms because essentially they drive everything we do in product management. So the concept of value is key to everything. We have to be able to measure it and understand it. It drives our decision making. And later on, when you're talking about kind of more of the delivery side of things and things like product backlogs, etc., they're always ranked in priority order, and that's according to value. So you need to understand that the whole way through the process. And then customers and users. So the people who are buying the product might not necessarily be the people who end up using it. So it's the difference there. But the users, again, are one of the focus points of product management. As in you're defining what their problems are, and then you're trying to solve them. You're kind of putting yourself into their world. We even have the concept of user stories when we're trying to kind of break down the work to be developed. So it's essentially user-driven design is what we would refer to. And then the organization. So essentially there has to be commercial value to what you're doing. I mean, there's no point in making a product unless you're actually going to make money out of it, and it's going to be successful. Okay, so skip the slide there. The scary thing is that 80% of new products fail. So building products is risky and it is hard, and it's to be in that small percentage that are actually successful is incredibly difficult. But this is where the key concepts of product management will set you up for success. They will give you all the frames of reference, the things you need to be thinking about in order to be successful. So interestingly, here's some research into what are the top reasons why startups fail and products fail. And the key thing, it just seems like madness, but 42% of startups fail because there was no market. That just seems a bit bonkers, but the truth of the matter is that people have this idea and they fall in love with it and it becomes their baby and they become really passionate about their idea. And they actually don't spend the time trying to understand who the users are and is there a market for their idea, and is there the right size of market, will people pay for this? There's all these concepts that kind of go around the product that will make it kind of successful. One of the key examples of this is actually Google Glass. I mean, Google is put forward as obviously, an amazingly successful company, but they do lots of things that fail as well in order to kind of, I guess, make sure some things succeed. But they put 400 million, they had a 400 million loss into Google Glasses. And this is the key example of where kind of an idea kind of got away with itself, or the technology existed, but actually what was the problem it was solving? Why would people buy this? Why would they use it? And this is kind of the mindset that product managers bring to product management. So effectively, to have a successful product, there's 3 things you need to be thinking about. Whether it's usable, so this is all the product design, usability side of it. If it's viable, so this is is there a market for it? Is it actually going to land within that market? So is it going to be commercially successful, like your pricing structures and cost structures and all the business and marketing side of it? And then essentially, is it feasible? So yes, you might actually have a problem that's big enough that people, it's a big enough problem that's worth trying to solve. And there might be a market that will pay for this, but actually, if your idea isn't feasible in any way, shape, or form, then it's, there's no point to it. And so it's this intersection of these 3 variables that product lives. I would actually say this is where the product team lives, because It's not just a product manager, although we are thinking about all these things, but you have to have a whole group of people and a whole range of skill sets, and that team have to be empowered to make decisions in order to deliver a successful product. So that's essentially what you're trying to do then is you've got two things you're thinking about. So your product problem fit. So does this solve the problem? I'd actually must take a step back and be like, have I got the right problem? So understanding the problem fully and then trying to say, right, have I solved this problem correctly? So you've got this first product problem fit thing area to work through. And then you've got the concept of a product market fit. So, you know, is this a good market for it? And how do you actually launch it and land it into the market? A nice way to conceptualize those two key concepts and also all the things that you have to think about to make a successful product, all these things that sit under product managers in a product manager's wheelhouse, is this concept of a lean canvas. So this was created by Ash Mara, and you step through it in this order. It's a nice way to just kind of get out of your head if you've got an idea for a product, or you know you want to kind of have your one pager, like what is your strategy, as it were. You fill this out bit by bit. Left hand side is all the product kind of things, and the right hand side is all your market variables. And the way a product manager works, effectively what our job is like we look into each of these segments, and we bit by bit validate that we're confident that everything in that box is correct. Again, it sounds really obvious because it's just like, well, yes, I know who my user is, and yes, I know the solution, you know, what my solution is, and yes, it's going to work. But actually, everything that you're thinking is just an assumption until you've proven it correct. So the job of a product manager is to effectively work as quickly as possible through all the top risks and top assumptions that come out of an exercise like this. Like the key things that if this thing proves wrong, it's going to scupper this entire product. It's essentially the product manager's job to go, okay, how can I make myself and this team as confident as possible that this piece of information is correct? So essentially you're working through, well, what are the key problems that we're solving? Who is the user? Like, you know, how can I prove that, you know, that this is the right problem and this is the right user, et cetera, et cetera. And you basically walk the whole way through this. I'm going to talk maybe a little tiny bit about product managers versus product owners at some point, but I think something I would call out that is a nice one way to think about it is product managers are thinking about kind of all these things, and they're also thinking about a product lifecycle, which I'll come into in a minute, kind of end to end. Product owners, one way to think about it, I guess, is it's a role in a Scrum team, so it's a delivery role. So product owners tend to be thinking about the problem, sometimes not even so much if they're not given the power to do discovery work and they're just doing delivery. They'll only be thinking then in that case about maybe solution and their users, but they won't necessarily be thinking about, you know, all these other things or be empowered to think about all of them. Okay, so product management. These are the kind of the steps you're going through. So the concept of a product life cycle, you've got a problem. In fact, what I'd actually say before you kind of go into a problem, if you're thinking about it from a business perspective or like a, you know, like a bigger enterprise perspective, you're kind of almost starting out with like your vision and your strategy as well. If you're a startup, it is generally you're jumping into, right, there's this problem I'm going to solve. But when you get into bigger examples, you're actually aligning to a business vision and a strategy, and the problems will come out of it. But everything you're doing with your product should link into and be delivering to that vision and kind of objectives and strategy. So you've got a problem. Like I said, you then kind of investigate and research your problem, make sure you're confident you've got the right problem, and then you go through a series of like experiments and you know, a lot of work around your solution and ensuring you've got the right solution. So that could be anything from like rapid prototyping and, you know, all those kind of things. And then essentially you've then got these parallel streams of work where you're setting up all the business processes around it, all the things that you need to kind of make that a commercially viable product. So you're thinking about, well, what's your business model? What are your pricing strategies? You know, there's a lot of work around that side of it. And then in parallel, your engineering team is going to be building this product. And again, this is where the product owner within Scrum role comes in, because if you're using Scrum, there are many different methods you could be using. There's lots of different agile and non-agile delivery methodologies, but you're going through this delivery process of building your product. And then you kind of are launching it into the market. And again, this is a whole phase, kind of a lot of people specialize this in its own right, this kind of go-to-market plan. And then you go through a phase of learning. I would actually say learning goes the whole way through this. This is a thing about, fail fast, but I think actually what they're trying to say is learn fast, which is why you're trying to take the risk out of your product by doing that upfront with your, your research or your problem and your solution phases. Going backwards. And then you kind of have these different ways your product can go, which is you're either going to grow, or you're going to realize through your learning that actually something in that canvas isn't right. So the problem isn't right, the market isn't right, the pricing isn't right. You do something where you might pivot to kind of try and find your product fit, or your market fit. Or you die, a bit dramatic, but you might be in that 80% that just fail. And then you can optimize ongoing. Product managers work through all these different stages. And in fact, different product managers can specialize in different areas. You can have growth product managers, and you can have startup product managers, etc. But essentially, that is product management. So yes, I stole this. Like all these slides are coming from obviously very smart people, all these different theories. But this was actually from Melissa Perry, who is, I think, the queen of product. Her book, Escaping the Build Trap, is basically a product manager's 101. And actually, I've got it here. I can show you it quickly. For anyone who wants to know anything about product management, this, as you can see, with posties in it. Escaping the Build Trap is basically like your Bible to product management in your introduction. And she kind of stuck this meme up in this picture up, because there's this whole, I think there's a bit of an angst at the moment about, well, what's a product owner and what's a product manager? And effectively, that's the way I think about it, is just that product managers, and I don't know how much longer I can keep talking, but I've got a little bit of the history of product management slide. The concept originated almost 90 years ago when Procter & Gamble first came up with the concept of brand men. So it's been going on for a long time. Product managers were building products using waterfall before kind of agile came into existence 20, 30 years ago, and this concept of product owner came into existence. I think where people get a little bit confused sometimes is that the roles, the terms can get used interchangeably, and sometimes people use the term product owner because it sounds quite fancy. I've seen bigger companies use it because to give to a senior person, like you own that, because it kind of sounds like they're more accountable for it. Where I think it can be a bit detrimental is sometimes if Scrum isn't implemented correctly, a product owner is just too delivery focused. They're not empowered to do research or discovery or look at the problem or own any of that. And that for me kind of it can be a bit of a risk factor. And that's why I think sometimes people prefer the term product manager, because it emphasizes the fact that they're owning that research and discovery part as well. They're owning the whole thing end to end. Okay, so product manager, I think I'll flick over this a little bit quickly, but basically you're doing just lots of things. You're a generalist, you're kind of a Jill of all trades. You're never going to be like the specialist in the room, because you bring together all the specialists to make the product happen and to get it launched. And once it is launched, you're coordinating between product marketing and a care team, and depending on how you scale up. So essentially you're kind of the hub of a lot of other things. And you're working at a strategic level and at a tactical level, and you're working at discovery and at delivery. And so you're kind of doing lots of things, and no 2 days are the same. You're continuously trying to think, well, what's the most valuable thing I should be working on at the moment? So yeah, that's pretty much that. Strategically, tactically, discovery, delivery, internally with your team, so focusing inwards, and externally with your customers and stakeholders and all of that stuff. So this is the history of product management, the product manager, I guess, as a role. I just want to focus on the first thing, because the first step of this, because I don't think people would even trace product management, realize that product management goes back to those early concepts. But in the 1930s, Procter & Gamble, it was actually this guy, Neil H. McElroy. He was really young at the time. He's in his kind of early mid-20s. And he did this, like, had this concept that, this memo that he kind of cascaded out within Procter & Gamble. And essentially, he was basically trying to build up a business case to hire more people. But he had this proposal that actually you should organize the division around brands. And essentially, one person would own the brand, and they could then be put they could move their responsibility right to the customer, and they could then research the customer and own the brand from the customer the whole way through. And that was revolutionary at the time, because that's just not how things were organized or how they were driven. But his idea was taken on board, and it just changed basically history and how the concept of brands came together. How kind of the concept of this brand men and how they built these brands. And then he was teaching at Harvard, and he inspired some of the students there, who then basically were working at Hewlett Packard, and then they took that concept into Hewlett Packard, and they used that, and they drove like huge growth for about 40 years as well, just following the same concept. And so it's kind of gone on from there. And then in the kind of the last 20-30 years, you've got the concept of kind of digital and software and Scrum or agile, and kind of the role has evolved through that. And what is more interesting, I think, product management has become really, really popular, even just in the last few years. It's kind of coming out now as as a standalone function in its own right, because its importance and how critical it is in the success of products and in differentiating them, it's now seen actually as a critical role. So you can see here it shows what function product managers reported into, and even between 2017 and 2019. So 2017, you had less than 10% of product managers would report into a function called product, whereas by 2019, over 50% of product managers were reporting into a product function. And I can see this even in my own career. So say 15 years ago, I was reporting into marketing, I reported into engineering at one point. My last company in Shopkeep, I was reporting into VP of product, and that's where you can start to see that kind of importance of the role coming out. Okay, I think I'll pause there, because this deck has a lot of other things going on it, but that's pretty much product management, a whistle-stop tour, 101. And I can stop there. I'm not sure if we're doing questions or if we'll just pass on to people and do it at the end.
Yep, yeah, we'll take a wee quick break and have a wee look through the chat here. So a couple of questions came through. One from Martin, just probably thinking about when you've got that idea and you're starting to build a product, maybe thinking about, is it better to start developing a new product from the start and the ground up, or taking an existing product and adding a bit? And I suppose it depends on the use case and the end customer, I guess. But if we have some insights, that'll be good.
Is that for me or for anyone?
Martin, do you want to jump off?
Yes, Emma, thanks very much for that swift introduction to product management, about something I know nothing about at all. And the question is essentially, there's issues with both. If you're starting from the ground up, you have an awful lot of work to do. If you take somebody else's or an existing product and try to add to it, there's a whole lot of issues in regard to IP, whether it works properly or not, whether you're actually allowed to do that, and what actually is the industry convention or standard in regard to that, if there even is one for product managers, product developers. Is it trying to improve what exists, or is it something else?
No, I think so. This is a little bit like the buy or build decision, really, and I think a lot of it boils down to, so what is it you're trying to solve? So there's a lot of things that are just industry standards, like you're not going to be able to improve them in any way, shape, or form. So why would you spend money rebuilding them? Do you know what I mean? There's core things you can just buy, and then the thing that's going to differentiate you. So I guess that canvas, there was segments for like, well, what's your unique value proposition, or what's your like competitive advantage or whatever. So basically, if you can get a core, you can buy in a core, but then you can differentiate in some way, buying that core in can like super accelerate you. Do you know what I mean? It can save you so much time, because basically the coding, the development part of the product is the most expensive part. So that's also why people hire product managers, because we can do a lot of research, which means that you don't end up building things that, you know, aren't valuable. So essentially you're kind of making sure that you're making that bit the most valuable bit. So for me, I don't think you always need to be building things afresh in any way, shape, or form. I think, you know, the thing you should be focusing on is like what is going to differentiate me, or what is going to prove something, you know, like the experimentation side. So I said, like the point is to make yourself confident in something. So, you know, like if you want to buy in a course so that you can test something out much more quickly and then work out what it is you want to differentiate on, you know, then you could do it that way. Is that helpful? Is that actually helping? Yes, thumbs up. Okay, cool. I think basically if you found a problem that no one in the world has solved yet, which is hardly likely, to be perfectly honest, you know, then yes, you will probably have to build something from scratch. But most of the time, you know, you're basically creating different, like, alternatives to solutions to things that already exist. Which again, if you're doing it in a completely different way, you could create it from scratch. But you know, a lot of the time, there's things that you could use that will just accelerate you. Yeah.
Oh, no, thank you. It's really helpful. I mean, some of the things that we would be talking about in the startup world, the founder wears a lot of these hats, you know, to start with, until like Chris mentioned, you get the chance to pass the hat on. So the usability, viability, and feasibility thing, we were talking about that actually today with one of our startups. And even, you know, testing the assumptions until it's proven, you know, testing everything that you're thinking is going to happen. I think that's really valuable, both from a technical side and from a startup founder side as well. So some great takeaways. So thank you so much, Emma. Really, really helpful and insightful. And leads us on nicely into Neely. Neely is a CTO working with one of our startups, MyPam, and Kufa's on the call, but also in her own right, Neely is passionate about helping startups and small businesses starting out as a software engineer and working with teams right through some large projects with Simon's, Featurespace, and a few others, right into head of product and chief product officer. So if there's a role, I think, that's been done, I think Neely's done it. And thank you very much, Neely, for joining us. So I'll pass over.
Oh, thanks, Jenny, for the intro. I've got one question for you. What is more exciting, watching your child grow or watching your ideas come to life and develop into a product? Now, if you have your kid in the room, you might not want to answer that. I have to say that I'm really passionate about watching new ideas come to life, even if it's just an early prototype, when everything looks clunky, or if it's manufacturing product, you have built something that might not mean anything to other people, but means a lot to you. As product people, we get really attached, emotionally attached to what we've built, to our child, to our product. And similarly as well, we constantly have to juggle and listen to the inputs of other people on how to raise our child. We think that we know best, but we cannot do it in isolation. So how do we stay sane? I'm Neely, I'm the Mary Poppins of business, and I'm here today because I'm passionate about supporting you think differently in terms of not just product management, but how do you create a culture in your organization that allow your product people to stay sane, and also build a culture of curiosity to keep all the departments working well together. Those are some of the common issues I've seen in organizations. And as you are probably thinking about bringing on product people, how do we make sure that as your startup is growing, you kind of bear all of those little things in mind as well. We're going to look at 3 different things today: the shiny object syndrome, falling in love with conflict, and wine and dine your organization. Shiny object syndrome, what does it mean? Well, as a product person, we constantly have to juggle many ideas and many inputs. We work a lot with customers, but that's not just the only source of input that we have. We do research, but we also work with the organization. Founders, especially visionary founders, always have a lot of ideas. And for many people, especially when you're not aware of the product development life cycle, it can be a bit tricky because you think that anything can be built in 2 or 3 months. So I'm really grateful that Emma had a slide on the product development life cycle to really bring things to life. So how can we support our product people? Well, first of all, especially when you're hiring and asking people a question, you want to have people in your organization that are comfortable asking the question why. Why is one of the most important questions, in my opinion, that a product person needs to ask. Whenever they are faced with a new feature, why are we building it? Sometimes you get clients, if you already start with your application or your proof of concept, they might say, well, your competitors do that. That's good for them. But why do we need to do that as well? Whenever, as a founder, you kind of ask them to do something, they also have to challenge you. And I guess co-founder Cole knows that, because I always ask him why. Even if I think it's a good idea, the question why is not so much to say I'm disregarding it, but I really want to think about the motivation that lays behind. What is the business objective? How is it going to be accepted in the market? So I need to know a lot of information. So if you are working with product people that are not asking you the question why, you should be worried, and there's something to fix as well. In terms of the shiny object, the other thing to bear in mind are the shiny objects, buzzwords. AI is one of the biggest buzzwords. So whenever I work on a project that needs AI, I ask even more why, as Cooper will tell you as well. When I was head of product, one of the issues we had to deal with, I jumped on when they've been running and developing a few products, and the company was quite small. So we already were dealing with budget restriction, engineering restriction, and everything else. So asking the question why allowed me to understand, why are you starting this AI project? Well, it's going to help us gain more market in the future. Perfect idea. The logic was there, but as a product person, when you start looking at the pipeline and planning on which feature do you build first or next, there was no point building something AI related that required a lot of investigations when it needed to be built after another software that they needed to do internally. So as you can see, asking why is not just so much to say no to new ideas, it's also to help us create a product pipeline, just pretty much a product roadmap. Again, when you first start your company, you have a lot of ideas, but the question why will help us to prioritize. So in a nutshell here, really, really be aware of shiny objects. And as startup founders, getting new people on your team, really create this culture of allowing your product people and your organization to ask the question why, to be curious, and to challenge what we want to build, because every single thing that you build costs money. And you want to use especially as you're growing and you might not have a lot of resources, you need to kind of be careful about how you are doing that as well. The second thing we look at is falling in love with conflict. And that goes hand in hand with why. I've worked with product managers that really struggle because they really struggle to challenge people. So that makes your job difficult. You need to be okay to lose certain fights. As a product person, there are some times where I think, yeah, we're not going to do this. And maybe my boss or someone will be saying, we're doing this, we've done our research. Okay, if I do my research and I believe it's the right thing to do, I will let go. But the most important is not winning in the sense of winning the fight, but it's about, as I said before, challenging and being able to say no when it's the right time to say no, but to start a positive and productive conflict and debate. And again, if you're working in environments where there's no conflict with the product team, something is going wrong. Because as the nature of developing a product, we want to do more than the capacity that we have, the time that we have, and there will be a lot of conflict. One of the ways to turn negative conflict into productive conflict is to train your different teams that interface with products and the senior leadership to understand product development for what you're building. As Emma started as well, she already showed the product life cycle, which was amazing. Now, if you are building a software, you also want to understand at a senior level how to the engineering life cycle, just to give you a bit more ideas on how long a product will really take. And if you're building a manufacturing project, you want to do that as well. So it's really important to understand the fact that there's always going to be negotiation going around. So you want to hire people who are comfortable with, even if you're paying them at the end of the month, to look at you in the eye and say, why are we doing this? Say no when you need to. And a nice way of saying no is always to negotiate and play around with features. As Kufa, you don't mind me sharing some of the things that we were working on. We're building a software. I'm not going into a lot of details on that. It will take me all day because I'm so passionate about it. But the idea is that we needed to build certain feature or metrics in the platform. We started with a large number. We went through a grueling session to reduce to 15. Then we needed to go into deeper investigations. The deeper you go to investigate the proof of concept, the more you want to narrow down the features, which is quite hard because as a founder's perspective, they're speaking to customer investors, everybody wants to see everything else. And my job is to go, oh, well, I know they want that, but what is more important for us to look at? So we had a discussion, ended up with 3. Kufa called me on there and says, I've got one more. I was like, okay, I give you one more. And he calls me another day and wants one more. And I was like, no, sir, I know you're paying me, but I have to say no. But it's your lucky day. Do you want to swap one feature for another one, right? So those are ways I tend to get people engaged. And again, it's important not just to say no, but also understand why they want those things, because then I can say, not right now, it's in the product pipeline. Sharing the pipeline with all of the senior leadership team and the organization makes people more confident to know that we're not going to get it today, but it's coming. She has her eyes on that as well. So it's really important to build a culture in your organization and hire product managers, especially when you're starting up. There's not many people in your organization. So you want someone that can say no when they need to, they can create positive conflicts, not negative one, and really, again, fall in love with what they're building as well. The last one we are going to look at is wine and dine your organization. And that's something that I always encourage product people to do, and founders to create a culture of curiosity to allow product people to wine and dine the entire organization. As Emma rightly said, a product person, we tend to focus a lot on the outside world. We talk to a lot of customers, we understand the market, we look at users and all of that. One of the key things, if you're not careful, for a product person, you might be so out there that you don't actually pay a lot of attention to what's happening inside as well. When you first start building a project, that could be building a product, that could be okay. But as you develop and grow and add more feature, it's important to keep your entire organization in check, really. And why? Well, products really, although we have a separate function, as you were saying earlier, products really cannot exist on their own. Product exists with everybody else. And we are the people who run around making sure that everybody else is also updated, have an understanding of what we build and everything else. So this is just an overly simplified version of what we have to deal with, because I couldn't find a Venn diagram that fits all of the departments. So I went for a simplification. The sales team needs to know what product is building, what product has built and will be building in the future, so that they can get some customer interested. The operations needs to know what product is, what new products are coming, so that they can be ready. Engineering, well, them or manufacturing, depending on where you are, they can't live with our product because we're like a couple, really. And you go marketing, which is another side of the couple in this kind of a bigamy relationship here, because even if you build the best product without the involvement of marketing, how are you going to attract new customers as well? And there's many other functions. Now, when we look at product development, again, as I've talked about this idea of raising a child, product people, we're really passionate about what we're doing. We're really into this. And sometimes we can be blindsided, work so much on having the right feature or having everything that we want to build, and it looks absolutely amazing. Maybe just a month or two before launching, we turn around and says, hey, we're launching this, customer service people, get ready. People want to come through the door. So imagine the impact that's going to have in your organization and the headaches as founders you have to deal with to start bridging the gap between all the different departments. So whenever you are looking for a new product manager, it's also a really good question to ask them, how do they work with the other departments? You want someone who has their eyes on the customers, the outside world, but they know how to wine and dine your internal organization as well. Account managers, salespeople always go out with customers and always buy them a few drinks. The same happens with product managers. When you're in the field, if you're doing some research with customer, you'll wine and dine them. So what kind of things can you do internally as a product owner, a product person, to be able to wind and down your organization? Well, there are various things, depending on the size of the organization. It's a lot easier when it's quite small, obviously, because you can talk to absolutely everybody. But as you start growing, as your product, maybe you might have different product managers based on what you're building or area of your software or whatever it is. But you need to make sure that regardless of all of the different product managers that you have, all of your organization know what's going on. You can have simple things like lunch and learn. A lot of the times when we talk about lunch and learn is about bringing maybe an external speaker or things like that. Well, things that I've done in an organization is to encourage them to talk about products without having too many slides, because then it creates work for product people who have a lot of work, but really talk about what's coming up. Really create this area of curiosity by sending an invite, talking about the new feature that you are building, asking people to get involved in testing. Sometimes you might want to go into different departments, ask their input on testing and things like that, just so that they feel that they are part of it as well. Of course, as product people, we really believe that it's our baby. Unfortunately, when it comes to building a product in our organization, it's a baby that we also have to share with other people. So that's a really, really important thing that I really wanted to raise today. I spent quite a bit of time on this one, as this is one of the biggest issues that I've seen, especially in small companies growing really rapidly. The friction with everybody else against products, just because 2 months before launch day, product decide to update other people, and that causes problems. So that's something that you want to avoid by creating a culture of curiosity. Bring the people who have their hands on the pulse, know what's happening on the market with the clients, but also are aware of internally how you can also look at the other department as your stakeholders as well. So that's pretty much all I had with you today. The 3 key things that I've talked about was the shiny object syndrome, making sure that you have product people that ask the question why. It's not about completely disregarding what you are saying or what you want them to do, but it's really about bringing more clarity, more planning, understanding the priorities, as we were talking earlier about priorities of different things. Without asking the question why, it's really difficult to be able to build the right thing for yourself and for your organization as well. Falling in love with conflict, positive conflict, is one of the best things that you want from a product person. It's all about building positive relationship with pretty much all of the other departments, and creating a culture that empowers product people to say no, even to you as a founder, or to say maybe not now, in the future, which could be especially when we start looking at resources as well. And the last one, definitely make sure that you have a person in your organization, so that your product team, when we're looking at the life cycle, keeps everybody else involved to ensure a nice and smooth launch. There's more I could have said, but with the time ahead, if you think about those 3 things as you are putting your product function together, you will enjoy better. I wouldn't say sleepless nights, because as founders, there's always going to be a problem that you have to deal with. But at least when it comes to product development, things will run a little bit smoother. As Emma said, building a product is hard, but there are ways that you can start changing and creating happy and productive teams as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nelly. I think it's taking the challenging bits of the product management that maybe we don't often see, and talking about them a wee bit more. The shiny object syndrome we see quite a lot, and maybe some suggestions of how you get around that. I've heard of, is it a marketing requirements document, to make sure that the 10 things on the wish list, you're running them through a tick box exercise to make sure that you actually really do want to build them and they're going to add value. Have you anything else that maybe how to funnel those ideas through into what you want to build?
Yeah. And I guess it's also really important to have them written down somewhere, because I've seen a lot of people come up with really great ideas, but maybe it's not the right time right now, like the AI example I gave you. So at this point, if you have a pipeline somewhere where you can put the ideas, you can come to that later. But right now, when you do your most 10 important things, that's not one of them.
Yeah. There's a question there from Chris. Chris, do you want to jump off? It's about product and building connections. Chris, do you want to ask the question?
Yeah, I can ask away. Yeah, like when you had that diagram, like the different circles, and you had like, product in the middle and the different teams. Like, I think it's like in a lot of places I've been, it's like it's hard to build that empathy and connection between those different departments. It's always like, product hates engineering, engineering hates product. Nobody wants to make an agreement, egos and fights and stuff kicking. Like, how do you come into that environment and foster and build those connections so people are playing off the same sheet and working together?
Yeah, and I guess that's most of it really comes at the leadership level, and that's one of the reasons why I talk about being the Mary Poppins of business, because a lot of things that we do in product really start about how you create the culture of your organization. I've been in organization where if the management team and engineering or marketing, I say marketing and product, or engineering and product, they don't work well together, it makes life really, really hard. I think it's really important that when you start to really look at the relationship between the leadership team for both teams, and how, when we look at team building, it's another thing that sometimes frustrates me. A lot of people look at team building based on my team, right? Which is great. So if my engineers, we go on team building together. Well, with product, it's actually really awkward because first of all, product managers work with everybody else, not even with each other sometimes, yet they are out of the team building. So some aspects, some of the ways I sometimes suggest that will be to, if you want to kind of get people to know together, also look at team building from a perspective of the product teams that are working together so that they are nurturing their relationship with each other, different teams working together as well. So that would really, really help. And the second one is communication, and that really falls on products, unfortunately. It's really the product responsibility, especially your chief of product or whoever is the senior level, to train their team to go above and beyond in terms of how they communicate with other departments. It could be that not every single product manager can do that, but if you have one person on the team whose role is to keep an eye out on how we are communicating with other people, it makes it easier for the lives of product managers to create this culture of curiosity and bring people together as well.
Okay, cheers. That's really helpful, actually. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for your question, Chris. If there's any other questions you want to follow up, we'll put Nelly's details into the chat as well. We would like to follow up Nelly with James. So James Donaghy has experience both as a founder and working as a product owner within Bizarre Voice. So I think it's good to have both sides of the story, from startup right up to corporate, and took more of a non-technical route into a technical job. So, exciting, I think, to see that journey, James, and to see the transition from startup into product owner, and looking forward to your presentation. I'll pass over.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I'll just share my screen here. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about product management and product ownership, I guess, in the same context broadly. I guess ultimately both of them are product management fields. There is quite a bit of crossover with kind of some of the things that Emma touched on, which I don't know why that would be a surprise. We're ultimately kind of working in the same field, but I'll skip over some of those quickly. So yeah, just jumping into it, what I'm going to try and do is basically walk through some of the things that maybe Emma had touched on as well, in relation to this construction of this presentation itself, right? So applying some of that product mindset and product thinking to how you would go about actually putting this deck together. So as Emma had kind of touched on, right, problem statement is often where you would kind of start, right? So again, this may be very much a hypothesis at the early stages, but certainly starting out. So if I take this presentation, for example, we might say that product management and product ownership roles are not well understood. Roles are inconsistent between companies and industries, and tech for non-tech stakeholders are confused. And then you might actually look at a potential solution to that problem, right? So the solution in this case, we're going to organize a tech for non-tech meetup. We're going to invite some folks who work in product to share their experience, discuss and answer questions, so that the audience comes away with a clear understanding of product management and product ownership. So something I also like to look at is actually defining failure, and this it also touches on the risk element that Emma has sort of touched on as well. So it may sound kind of negative, but I think it's important to think about where you don't want to end up as much as it is to think about the things that we can add to make things successful, right? So In this case, it would be very simply, right, if no one shows up to the presentation, then it doesn't matter how good the presentation is, we don't have an audience there, so it's not going to succeed. The tech doesn't work. If Zoom crashes or the internet falls over, whatever happens, right? If the tech doesn't work, again, that's a failure point. And so we want to do everything we can to kind of mitigate that risk. The audience can't hear or see the presentation clearly. I'm sure we've all sat through presentations where, the text is too small or the microphones aren't great, right? And the message is totally lost in that case. So again, it's just it's a potential point of failure that you need to think about. And then if I ramble on too long and folks are bored and it's not engaging, again, that's something that you as a presenter need to be conscious of. But like many of you, I've sat through presentations where you're just kind of switched off after a certain period of time, and again, there's a failure point there to consider. And then lastly, kind of the audience is confused with fuzzy words and technical jargon. I think our industry in general, loves technical jargon and loves to use words which for a certain audience don't really resonate. And now they touched on, integrating product with all those different elements of the company. I think it's very important to think about the language that we use and how we communicate with, sales, marketing, whatever side of the business it may be, because I think sometimes we get caught up in, the tech side a little bit, and the message can be lost in that regard. So then looking at actually defining success. So thinking about this presentation itself, right? So people show up, very basic one, but we obviously need people to show up so we can kind of communicate the message. The tech works, right? So everything is reliable. And again, these are things that we can actually track and measure, right? So your success metrics are ideally measurable things that you can look at and measure in retrospect to determine if you actually were successful or not. So, in terms of people showing up, you might actually have a number attached to that. The tech works, right? You might be able to measure uptime and things like that, or did things crash, right? The audience can hear and see the presentation clearly, right? Again, very simple one, but definitely something you need to think about when you're imagining your audience, right? Can they actually see and be conscious of that? For is the audio good? Again, be conscious of that. So again, it can be something that we can measure retrospectively by chatting to the audience. And then getting to the point, right? I need to get to the point, I need to keep it engaging, because if I don't, then I lose the audience, right? That's a point of failure. So again, something to think about in terms of success. And it's something we can measure afterward, right? We can chat to stakeholders involved after the fact and determine that. And then finally, the audience actually understands the content and the message. So coming back to not using those technical words or jargony words too much, and just keeping the language simple. So again, we can ask folks after the presentation, did you understand things? Was it clear, right? So just measuring that as well. So I also love a Venn diagram, right? So I think it must be just like standard in product or our industry to just have a Venn diagram in here somewhere. So I'll skip through this one because Emma touched on this a little bit as well, but I love this. I think it is a great reference point for both early stage like startup founders, but also in a corporate environment where you're building something new, right? A new feature that's unproven. So the viability piece, right? Like, is it sustainable? Can we make money? In the context of this meetup event, right? It's not necessarily like, it's not a money making enterprise, right? So it doesn't necessarily apply here, but very often in the context of technology products, we are looking at crunching the numbers to make sure that it is actually viable, right? So the cost that it takes to build something and what is the return on investment on the other side, and does it actually make sense, right? So it would be an immediate red flag if those numbers look off from the outset. Feasibility then, like, can it actually be done? Like, can the tech be built? So I think usually like that's usually a product question, right? Like, can the tech be built? And usually the answer is yes, but very often the discussions that I might have with my team would be like around, yes, we can build it, but it's going to take 8 months. And so the 8 months just doesn't make sense given the cost, right? So there's usually those like trade-offs, like, can we build something, with less scope, or can we build an MVP that's like lower cost? So there's usually those conversations there. And then, can the customer be reached? So this one, I guess, alludes more to distribution. And I seen something recently, I think it was a tweet, which was around like first-time founders focus on product, second-time founders focus on distribution, which kind of resonates. I think you very easy to get caught up on your beautiful products, kind of Natalie kind of touched on, right? It's your baby and you hold dearly to it. But you ultimately have to be able to reach your customer and find distribution, and especially early stage startup, right? You're trying to get that revenue through the door, and folks like Chris will know all about this, but yeah, that's absolutely critical. I can speak from my own experience of trying to reach customers that are hard to reach. So I worked in a startup environment, and I was trying to reach a customer, which was ultimately like a committee of folks. So it was very difficult to like reach the buyer in like public sector education. So something to think about as well is like who actually is that buyer, and can they actually be reached through distribution. And then finally, desirable, sometimes swapped out for usable, I think is kind of what Emma's one had. But very similar, like, does anyone actually want it, right? And ultimately you need to go out and speak to your customers to determine this, right? And like, will they actually pay for it, and how much would they pay for it? And this will also loop back into your conversations around viability, you know, so depending on how much your customer might be willing to pay for a product, that will help you make decisions as a product manager, product owner, about actually pursuing that feature, that product. And then success is somewhere in the middle, right? That's the really hard bit, is getting something that's lots in the middle of all three. And that's why what we do is quite hard usually. So just sort of summarizing then, so what is the problem, right? First and foremost, like, what is your proposed solution that you're gonna test? Looking at, you know, defining that failure and your points of potential failure and the risks associated with that. And then looking at success, and success ideally that you can measure tangibly. And then finally, like viability, feasibility, and desirability as well. So I'm going to touch briefly. I think it would be remiss to not talk about the not so sexy stuff. I think I've definitely sat through like plenty of like talks and things about product management generally. And it's always like lovely frameworks and Venn diagrams. It's like, I've obviously used them myself, but like any job, there's like elements to the job which are, you know, just not that fun day to day, but very much like part of the role. And I think some of the startup folks, maybe it wouldn't resonate so much, but certainly in like a corporate environment, there are things like managing perceptions, right, is one. So you have a lot of stakeholders, and you kind of need to manage those perceptions of how your team is tracking. Very often you are the point of contact for like the engineering team that you work with, and you're trying to manage perceptions across the company. Aligning stakeholders, you'll be interacting right across the company, as we've already talked about, and this comes back to a really strong vision and strategy at the product level that you can align stakeholders around. I have been in an environment where sometimes that has been missing, and that's where it becomes difficult to align folks, because there isn't a clear vision, right? And you have folks asking for different things, and it's very difficult to like keep them aligned. Creating documents and slides, I think Natalie, you had touched on this, and actually communicating those out, but that is a reality. I think the startup folks here on the call will be fully in execution mode most of the time, right? They won't be doing this, and probably shouldn't be. But certainly in a corporate environment, it's not just like doing the work, it's actually documenting the process along the way, and then communicating that out to your stakeholders as well. Making calls with like imperfect information. I think this is one of the hardest elements of product ownership, is like, you know, you have two competing arguments, two decisions, and you maybe don't have the time or capacity to actually fully do discovery work on each, right? You need to make a quick call, and you have imperfect information to make that call. So yeah, I think you have to get comfortable with that ultimately, and keep things moving. Sometimes speed is your friend. So it's like not getting too bogged down in the weeds and prioritizing effectively. So yeah, one of the more difficult aspects of it is like saying no to things that you're ultimately not sure are the right decision or not. And then meetings, lots of meetings. I think if you want to work in product management, product ownership, it's just a reality. There's going to be a lot of meetings. I think it aligns with all the stakeholders that you'll have to interact with. And yeah, it's just doing all that discovery, doing all that research involves sitting in a room or virtually, has been the case lately, to kind of do that work. So definitely very much part of the rules. So that's kind of a wrap tour. I appreciate the time to listen. I am happy to jump into kind of questions in relation to maybe the product ownership piece versus the product management piece, and maybe there's a conversation there. So I'll leave a couple of questions here, which are just kind of common ones around that. So if anyone wants to dive into those, I'm happy happy to jump into those. But I would say, like, in short, it depends. Product ownership depends. Like, I've done a couple of product ownership roles now, and they were actually very different. And one, you would say, maybe is more aligned with product management, and this one is perhaps more that I'm currently in right now, more at a tactical level. So I guess it just totally depends on the company and their views of product management and product ownership. But yeah, I think Emma had also touched on, like, Roman pitched their stuff, and I had like a quick piece of his as well. He's great, got great stuff on the website. I think he talks about kind of Scrum product owner here on the left, which has like full stack product ownership, and then you have kind of the structure that some companies adopt, where it's more of like the strategy and vision is fulfilled by product manager, and then product owner is more at a tactical level with the engineering teams. So that can be a structure that companies use. But yeah, in short, I guess it depends on how the company kind of approaches the role. So yeah, I'll pause there to take a breather. But yeah, thanks for listening.
Oh, thanks very much, James. I thought it was interesting. I often talk about, like, start at the start in terms of the feeling and the risk piece, in terms of the language and translating it into plain English. I always say it's a bit like technology translating from French into English and trying to explain it to the rest of your stakeholders. So that resonated, and particularly in terms of the touch points, measuring all those engagement, success metrics, and getting feedback on your product. I mean, those are all really key to the success of the business and the success of the product. So there were some really good points there. I mean, it's a really good question. You know, what's the difference between a product manager and a product owner? We've had some thoughts on that. My take on it, I think, is the product owner is the one maybe getting the customer feedback and feeding that into the product team and potential. But then the product manager's role is to then really lift that and see if it's viable. From what we're hearing tonight, that is it viable, is it feasible, and more the strategy piece, you know. So I can see on that last argument you showed maybe that differentiation of product owner having a slightly different tactical role than the strategy of the product manager. So I don't know, do you see it sort of sitting a bit more like that as people are thinking of building their teams and kind of their team roadmap? Because a lot of startups, they need to plan, if they're going for investment, they need to plan the resources, and then they need to plan their team. It all falls out of that.
Yeah, I think it's always difficult when you detach from the customer. I think that's where it becomes tricky, and that discovery phase, I guess. You know, if you split that role in a company between product manager, product owner, and one of those, you know, detaches from that discovery piece and that customer piece, I find it's very difficult right then to actually confidently make decisions and communicate with your team effectively about the why, you know, because if you're detached from that, you only have like maybe secondhand information. And I think that's always a challenge. So I guess for the startup folks, the beauty of it is that you're usually always connected to the customer, or you're certainly very close to someone in your team who is close to that customer. So it's a little bit easier maybe to get that direct feedback. So yeah, I think that's where it can maybe fall down a little bit. It's just when you detach the team, and I think it's easier to happen in a large corporation where you're maybe 3-4 layers removed from the customer. And then even like if you're outside of product management, if you're an engineer in the team and you're very detached from that, I think it's not particularly empowering either, because I think there's definitely, you know, a want from everyone on the team to understand customer perspective and the value of what they're actually building, right? So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it.
And we have, I mentioned earlier, technical founders looking for industry and industry founders looking for technical. Obviously, you came to this from a non-technical background and have dovetailed into it quite nicely. Do you want to talk a wee bit about that?
Yeah, sure, I can do. Yeah, so I came from more of a, I guess, the business marketing, digital marketing side of things. Just kind of my study area at college and stuff. But yeah, like kind of fell into tech with a startup I had some years back. And if you're in a tech role in a founder capacity, you're very much in product. I would say it's pretty ultimately, you know, Chris talked about it earlier, right? You're the founder, so he's driving the product roadmap from the early stages. That is very common. So I think product management aligns very closely with that founder piece. So I guess in terms of the technical, non-technical piece, I would say there is a need to be somewhat technical, you know, with a team of engineers. If you work closely with an engineering team and like a software development environment, there is a need there. Now, in my experience, usually what the team wants is someone who is more well versed in like explaining the why and understanding the customer, versus another person who can join in the conversations about how we're going to build this API and what are the specs, right? That's my experience of it, is like just thinking about where am I more valuable to the team. It's usually more giving that perspective that they're often missing in the team, versus getting into the weeds of like the technical conversations. So in short, I think it's definitely not a requirement, but certainly it does help bridge gaps with conversations, particularly if you're working very closely with an engineering team.
No, that's really helpful. I don't think gives
Can I add
confidence
something to what
across the
Jen
board.
said?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm just going to ask if I could add something, because I love what Jen said about these ideas of technical versus non-technical, because a lot of the time people do worry about that. And something I've seen in my own experience and other people as well, even if you don't have a technical background, you do pick up quite a lot, because you are exposed to engineers. For example, my previous job, just before I started my own company, I've been in software for all my life, but obviously that was a different types of AI that I never really didn't know much about it. But my job is to ask questions, right? It's about understanding the market and asking all the whys. And that's where you find a strong product manager will stand out. Having worked with those people for about 1.5 to 2 years, now I understand AI a lot better, that I can take to another role. But the most important focus is really understanding being able to ask the question and also explaining the whys to the wider organization as well.
No, I think it's it's a great insights, and maybe want to go back to Chris at the start. In terms of the product manager role that you're looking for, has any of the content tonight helped you refine maybe what you're looking for? Particularly, I thought some of the stuff that Neely was talking about in the culture piece, and looking for somebody that is maybe more of a, dare I say, a people person than a software developer person. Does it, Chris? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think like tonight just shows like just how there's so many opinions about what this role is, and I guess that's just like we've heard, depends on the company, depends on the team size and so on as well. I totally agree with what James was just saying there, but like, well, sort of from my perspective, you probably need some sort of, if you're going to be managing engineers, you need to have some sort of technical background, but at the same time, if that's all you have, then you might be more inclined to jump into actually coding rather than managing the code. And it's so tricky to find the right balance. My problem when like I say, I'm sort of informally doing the role, like I don't have as much understanding of it as I should, I think, but because maybe I'm more leaning towards the product design side of things, I have a bit of technical background, I then sort of probably overemphasize that kind of thing. Again, I tend to get too stuck in the weeds of actually what the thing is rather than the process of how to kind of build momentum over time and kind of be reliable, build a reliable process. So yeah, it's so it's definitely like, it's super interesting to hear all the different thoughts. And again, it just feels like yeah, like you're saying, it's about the people side of it and bringing the different disciplines together and coordinating them as much as anything as well.
We do a bit of work. You might know one of our co-founders is Matt Johnson, that was at Digital Circle, and he's always looking at ways of trying to improve and think about the skills piece. Product manager, product owner as a career. How do we try and promote that? Because obviously it's quite a key role in these organizations. How do we promote that? Maybe back down towards, I don't know, techs, universities, early careers. As this is actually, as Emma pointed out, kind of a growing sector. Is there anything more we can do to try and promote this, Emma, or what do you think? You're just on mute, sorry.
Did I actually get off mute? Okay. Well, just as I start to talk, the dog comes over. No, it's actually really interesting. So I've been talking to 2 different disciplines at universities about it. So my cousin is actually a doctor in marketing, and she teaches marketing. And so she was chatting to me at one point about, you know, like she wants to introduce these kind of modules in the marketing course, because a lot of product tools and techniques are marketing, like a lot of the research is. And then more interestingly, I did a lecture for Queen's University students, and the lecturer, he emailed me afterwards to say that they were so interested. It was similar content to what I just presented tonight. And it basically pinged in their head, and they were just like, whoa, this is the sort of stuff we need to know. And they were saying they would love a whole course, or, you know, a whole module on product management as part of the computer science course, because computer science course in Queen's doesn't cover any of this. I think it's starting to cover agile. I remember when I was working at Allstate, Queen's lecturers came in and they were chatting to us and bringing students in because they wanted to start talking about agile on their course. But in general, you know, they're things that they typically don't talk about particularly well on the courses, and they should do, because they're the skills you need once you get into, once you know you do get onto the job market and you're looking for jobs and actually working day to day. So yeah, I think what is more interesting though is where does that sit, because you could do a module in business studies or management or marketing or the computer sciences course, or there's courses that combine business and computer sciences, and you know, I know there's this double honors type courses, and I think it could sit in any of those as a module. I'd love to see it as a degree in its own right, but I don't even know if that's possible. I think there might be one degree potentially I've seen start to come out, so it'll start to move that way, but typically to date it's mostly been stuff people have learned on the job.
Well, I think it's definitely a topic that we can continue to promote and talk about as being a key role, because, you know, back to when we started talking about this event, trying to understand what product manager, product owner does, definitely understand that better and actually can see the real value in having them in an organisation. And I think Coop is still on the call, and Nearly, you guys are talking about, I mean, it being one of your first hires, Chris talking about it being one of its next hires. You know, how does it balance out? Does it ask the question to Chris against sales and marketing? And it does seem to be quite key, and balancing that out. So thank you for lifting that out. Any other questions, guys? We've done really well tonight, a really good session. I'd like to thank all the speakers, Emma, Nelly, Chris and James, for coming along. And I just wanted to do a really quick shout out to David today, because David was part of Techies for Residents, which was palling up with some charities and doing tech for good and coming up with prototypes and applying for some funding, and won some funding. So congratulations, David, for Techies and Residents. Well done. I think we've got our beers and wine here, so well done.
Awesome.
And coming up, obviously, if we continue to run our Tech for Non-Techs, if you've got any topics that are of interest, let us know. And towards the end of June, we're looking at some exciting things coming up, both in around sort of starting a startup and scaling in terms of sales, marketing and product development and team building. I'd like to run an event that encompasses all those if we can. And that'll lead into our next Raise pitching event, which is bringing startups and talking to investors as well. So that's all happening towards the end of June. So keep the 23rd in your diary. And yes, if there's any topics that you'd like us to cover, one we were talking about was maybe a bit more of an international field. Obviously, we've got Nearly today from Madrid, and also the CTO one is always a big question from our startups. If we're not technical, how do we get a CTO? And that's one that we've touched on before, but we might come back on. How do you attract top technical talent to a startup that maybe doesn't have a bit of a budget? So that's the type of topics we're thinking about. So if you've anything else, please let us know. Any final thoughts from this evening, guys? I'll go back around the speakers for a couple of one-liners before we finish. Chris, anything to finish off with?
Oh, gee, there's no pressure. No, I think
recruit for nice.
it's really interesting to sort of, like I said, learn more about it, and yeah, to kind of get just a better sense of just the range of options that there are. Yeah, looking forward to seeing that. Like you say, it's great that it's becoming a more formal role, and it's going to be great to see that develop over the next year or so.
Brilliant, thank you. Emma, any finishing thoughts from product management, product owner?
Oh, let's flip it to the thing. I was just going to say, to stay kind of passionate and curious. So the main traits of product people are just kind of wondering why things happen. So that's kind of, if you know, that would be the main qualities. And yes, happy to chat if anyone's interested in moving into product or wants to know about it. I'm happy for any virtual coffees, as you called it, if people want to chat.
Brilliant. Thank you. Nearly, anything you want to touch on? Maybe you say curiosity seems to be a key thing coming out here.
Yes, definitely curiosity. And it's, as you said, developing a product is hard, but it's really, really enjoyable. So if, again, just like Emma said, if you fancy talking, I'm happy to have virtual coffee, and I love talking about building and creating stuff, teams, products. So love to. So yeah, stay curious.
Good. And James, any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, just great that we're having these types of conversations, I think, around product management. I think there's a great scene growing in Belfast around product, and it's good to see that. And yeah, long may it continue. And yeah, I'm going to stop thinking about product management now and go and have a beer. That's my plan.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Really do appreciate it. Everybody's contact details there's on Twitter, and please do stay in touch and start some conversations. So we'll finish up this evening, guys, and go and enjoy a beer. Thanks very much.
Awesome, everyone. Thank you so much for the talk tonight. It's brilliant. Cheers.
Cheers.